All right. We'll get started in just another moment. How's everyone doing today? Anything fun going on?
It's just raining here in Idaho.
Is it starting to feel like fall yet?
Sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Not here, not in Los Angeles.
All right. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and kick this event off. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you're calling in from. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're calling in from. That's kind of a fun thing to see. Thank you all so much for being here today. Happy Friday. I'm super excited to kick this event off, but before I do have a couple of quick things to note. Just so everyone is aware, this event is going to be recorded. If you're uncomfortable with being on camera, please feel free to keep your camera off. That's totally fine. However, if you are comfortable, we would love to see your faces and would be so appreciative if you could keep your cameras on. Number two, none of our speakers today are speaking behalf on a government or a country. Everyone's speaking from their own perspectives. So please be aware of that. And three, if you have any questions during or throughout the event, please feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can wait to come off mute during the Q&A portion of this event. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, my name is Clara Schmay. I am the program manager for Globally's Emerging Leaders for Climate Action, or otherwise known as ELCA program, and I'm one of the hosts of this event. To give y'all a brief overview of who we are, the objective of the ELCA is to identify and bring together emerging leaders from various sectors across the United States who share a profound commitment to discovering innovative, sustainable solutions to addressing climate change. We've challenged our participants to collaborate on the development or enhancement of these solutions, which they will present at our upcoming summit in November. A couple of them are here today to open up the conversation on some of the things they are focusing on as they develop their policies. We will also be hearing from representatives of the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy and the UAE, whose mission it is to produce innovative thought leadership that furthers the understanding of diplomacy and international relations in the region and beyond. And finally, we also have friends from the Climate Cardinals, an international youth-led nonprofit working to make the climate movement more accessible to those who don't speak English. And they will be leading the Q&A portion. With that, we'll jump in and get this started with our first speaker, Laura. I'm going to pass the mic over to you.
Alrighty, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Mic check. Yep. Okay. Great. Alrighty. So my name is Laura Kazuzik. I am the co-founder of Island Sustainability Solutions, and I'm one of the lead consultants there. And I am working within Emerging Leaders for Climate Action as a way to broaden my knowledge on climate action and to work with amazing leaders who are also in the climate space. So I am one of the leaders working within the loss and damage group. So we're going to kick off the presentation talking about loss and damage and what it is and kind of why it matters. So when we talk about loss and damage, first and foremost, it's the Loss and Damage Fund. We are looking at what that looks like in terms of what loss and damage that occurs due to deprivation or deterioration of resources, goods, and services, both on the economic side and the non-economic side. And this is usually resulting from the impacts of climate change. And this is our group's working definition at the moment. There isn't one full definition for the loss and damage fund, because it's still being developed and it's still being worked on. So that's something to keep in mind. And when we get to the point, and so for our next point, for adaptation in the lens of loss of damage, we think about it in the sense of this is the funding process that helps make the adjustments regarding climate change. So you can't do anything else without the funds. So we really want to make sure that our recommendations regarding the loss and damage fund are appropriate and they're well thought out, and they, you know, it takes priority. And so you can't get anywhere else. You can't have the adaptation, you can't have the mitigation, you can't have a lot of the other things that you want to do if you don't have the policies around the fund. And so what's the effect? So I wanted to start out with a quote from Dr. Adele Thomas. She's at the University of the Bahamas. And she makes a key point in understanding loss and damages is that they can occur despite adaptation and even before the limits to adaptation have been reached. Limits to adaptation are the point at which adaptive responses cease to provide protection against climate impacts. And I think that's really important to remember, that, loss and damage can occur, even without an extreme weather event or anything else, because it can occur within non-economic and economic points. So some of the things that we're thinking about in our group, we're looking at policies regarding the blue economy, we're looking at extreme weather events, and we're looking at migration. With these three things being having a backbone with the finance. So again, we're always looking at that finance perspective, but we also want to look at these other points because that's really important as well. And so just to go into a little bit regarding our policies, our policy recommendations. So we want the fund governing structure to be focused on youth, indigenous, least developed countries, and SIDS, island states. And then the fund should be a standalone institution. We want it to be able to be as a gap coverage. We want it to look at funding mechanisms for cultural losses, for risk assessments, M&E, to look at better investments for funding preemptive measures. So looking at blue carbon, looking at marine protected areas and nature-based protection financing type of investments. And then we want it to prioritize strategies that's going to avoid compounding debt. So a lot of places that are going to get hit hard by climate change, we don't want these strategies to put them more and further in debt from a finance perspective. And then lastly, we want to accelerate development and deployment for a fit for purpose, innovative sources of finance that are measurable and have a co-benefit for all involved. And that's a little bit what we're doing. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. We're going to jump into our next presentation from our mitigation people. Glenn, will you please come off mute?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Glenn, and I'm a PhD candidate in Princeton University. And I largely work on research looking at the impacts of the natural gas and methane in the atmosphere, as well as our movement into the hydrogen economy. I'm here representing a group of people that I've been working with. the such as Saba, Aaron, Lucy, Lindsay, and Eileen. And yeah, like if we can go to the next slide. Um, this is what I'll be talking about today. So I'll firstly be covering what is mitigation, and then also then how does it affect us? And then lastly, also like what should we be thinking about? And in that section, I'll be kind of covering what our team has been thinking about in this space. So next slide. So yeah, like mitigation is an existential necessity. You know, it is a defining issue of our time. It's it was codified, you know, in most prominently in COP21 in 2015 in the Paris Agreement, where countries came together to say that we need to limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and try to get 1.5 degrees. And that would require us halving our current greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and then reaching net zero by 2050. But you know, where are we now? So this is a figure that I found that plots some recent research from the International Energy Agency. So we can see that the Paris Agreement has helped us reduce the trajectory of emissions. But and if current pledges are fulfilled, we can bring that even further down. But we can still see that there is an ambition gap that needs to be urgently addressed. The IEA has said that we cannot be building new fossil fuel projects, but as you know, as recently as a few days ago, like countries like the UK have said that they are resuming oil and gas projects. So you know, next slide. So why does this matter? If the world does not reduce emissions, we will see climate impacts continue to escalate, and we will continue to see disproportionate effects on the worst off. So focusing on the left column, I'm highlighting here that the poorest countries who have contributed the least to current emissions are the ones who are bearing the brunt of climate change impacts and will bear the brunt of future climate change as well. And so like I'm highlighting here the recent Pakistan floods in 2022. You know, these floods were made more severe than it would have been in the due to the warming caused largely by industrialized countries. And you know, it's led to huge devastation in Pakistan, and the country is still trying to recover from the disaster. And on the right side column, I'm highlighting that it's not just a global south, global majority problem. It is already affecting everyone. So highlighting recent events like the heat waves in the US and Europe, as well as the Canadian wildfires, which have led to very bad air quality around the North America. Like these events have been made more likely with climate change. So to conclude this slide, I want to highlight that mitigation allows us to prevent things from getting even worse. And we are protecting our future selves, but we're also protecting the most vulnerable people in the world and also our future generations. Yeah, next slide. So as much as we are focusing on this idea of cutting emissions, which is largely to like prevent things from getting worse in the future, people are being affected right now. Like, you know, the world is facing a poly crisis, you know, with interconnected like crises of drought, food shortages, all exacerbated by the climate crisis. And in our team, we wanted to make sure that we could try to find harmony and try to find a way in which we could bridge some of these concerns together. Like, is there a way in which we can achieve you know, cutting emissions while also trying to address some of the current issues that people are facing right now? And so what we've thought about is this nexus between water issues, food and land use, and energy. And perhaps looking at problems with this nexus in mind allows us to consider these issues in a synergistic way without neglecting one or another. And so what we want to achieve is that any climate finance projects or mitigation targets pledged in COP28 need to reflect impacts on water and food security, because we need to consider it in the planning stage to avoid policy lock-in. And we can bring together sustainable development, climate goals, and hopefully provide more impetus for fossil fuel phase out. As we've highlighted here in this cycle, fossil fuels have a big part to play directly and indirectly to water and food crisis, as power industrial systems being a main water user and being a major carbon emitter, which exacerbate climate change. Next slide. So lastly, like just highlighting very briefly, I know I'm out of time, but what we are proposing is some policy recommendations that help facilitate at the governmental level or at different levels, like ways in which you can consider all of these issues synergistically, whether it's by always thinking about, like in mitigation projects, thinking about water stress or an energy security index, or always thinking about a cross-sectoral impact assessment framework, or having a nexus agency to coordinate efforts to make sure that projects and are always thinking about multiple considerations. And with that, thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them later after.
Thanks so much, Glenn. We will now be jumping into the adaptation portion. Paulina, if you would like to take it away.
Thank you so much. Good morning, afternoon, good night to everybody. My name is Paulina Velasco, and I'm Senior Vice President of a public affairs firm that focuses on equitable engagement for large infrastructure projects. So with that, I actually want to start with a headline that was launched this week in the news about flowers blooming as glaciers melt. And this is just an example to show how our environment is adapting to the changing climate. So with that, I really want to explain what adaptation means, which is actions taken to minimize the harmful present and future impacts of climate change. And the accelerating climate change adaptation is imperative. It's imperative to humans because climate change exacerbates the wealth gap. It's an imperative for the environment because it also nature is at the forefront of defending any large climate change events such as hurricanes or wildfires. It's also an economic imperative because if we're able to plan now for any large change in climate, then it'll be cheaper in the long run. So with that, our team is actually focusing on developing a policy around land use and management regulations in a local level so that we can account for climate shifts as they occur and will occur. Next slide. So how does adaptation affect us? Adaptation is important for all. Ever since the beginning of this planet, species have been adapting. But for this particular topic, adaptation helps us survive in a changing world. And we must invest a massive effort to adapt on conditions that are now inevitable. High temperatures, rising seas, more intense storms, any unpredictable weather change. Although some of our efforts are sometimes not successful, if we don't adapt, our whole humanity goes extinct. Next slide. So what should we be thinking about? When we think about the when we think about how to adapt to the challenges of climate change, we can include new technologies and changing agricultural practices and the changing of our infrastructure. However, these what you will see in the screen is some nature-based solutions across landscapes to build resilience. So, for example, on the top left-hand side, you see that there's loss of loss of life and assets due to intense wildfires here in California and also in Canada. We have seen a number of wildfires in the last year for us, for the last decade. But for that, one of our solutions is forest management to reduce the risk of superfires. So here in California, we're using AI along with partnerships with universities to identify which are the, no pun intended, hotspots, so that we can better work at mitigating any potential small fire that might cause a larger fire. So also, for example, for the in cities on the right-hand side, when we see heat stress due to urban heat, and again, here in Los Angeles, there is not enough trees, so we need to increase our tree canopy, so we can so as part of that is building more parks, creating more green spaces, having rooftops that have parks, so that we ensure that we have more a better, what I like to call, green lungs in our cities. So when we do think about this, we need to identify ways that we can adapt our habitat so that we can really help mitigate or adapt to the new changing world that we see. Next slide. So in conclusion, there's a lot of really positive things happening in the space of adaptation. And one of the things that I want you to think about is how we create more urgency, innovation, and how we can scale up globally. So with that, I urge you to think about how we can analyze and learn and understand climate risk, and also how we can plan and make policy and investment and decisions to implement solutions, and also how we finance these actions. And to sum it all up, I wanted to end with for everybody to see the picture. As I started in the beginning, when I talked about the flowers, it's such an interesting picture to see how flowers are blooming as our glaciers are melting. So as much of a beautiful picture this is also a heartbreaking picture, because this is hopefully not the future of our planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paulina. And for the last speaker, not last but not least, from the ELCA side, we have Rituraj talking about climate finance. Rituraj, please take it away.
Cool. Hey everyone, this is Rituraj. I'm a grad student studying energy, and I work full-time to study, monitor, analyze, predict natural hazards. Like Paulina mentioned, wildfires, yes, that's one of the things we are looking at globally. So yeah, today we're going to talk about climate finance and the perspectives of renewable energy, however, it's more broad than that. First, let's talk about what is climate finance. I like to put it as a superhuman fund. It's a superhuman fund, or it's a super fund where we collect, use money to fight against climate change and its effect. It works in two ways. When it's first is stopping more damage, which we want to call it mitigation here, and capacity building. And the second way is fixing the current problems. Is like, okay, so we have stopped the damage. Now we're going to fix the problem so that it doesn't come again. And now I want to call that adaptation and capacity building here. Next slide. So the question comes is that why climate finance matters. All the things that you have heard so far, loss and damage, adaptations, and more you're going to hear. We need money and everyone's support to make that a reality, because we know climate change is real. We want to fix that. It matters in 4 sections I want to put here. Mitigation. Well, to mitigate the climate change, we need renewable energy sources. We need to phase out from carbon-intensive sources to renewable energy sources, carbon capture and storage technologies so that we can sequester carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We need green infrastructure. And then next, we want to move in adaptation, moving towards more smart agriculture, water management, human health, not just human health, I want to say ecosystem health here, infrastructure. Then we have energy transition. Yes, we can argue that energy transition can be in mitigation, but it is so big currently that we need to phase out from fossil fuel, or I want to say carbon intensive sources, to renewable energy sources. I was doing some quick Google and I was looking at it that more than 67% of our carbon dioxide currently today comes from carbon intensive energy related sources. So that's the, and then financial resilience. Not all the country have the same knowledge and technology to phase out to energy transition or to build the climate adaptation or mitigation programs. They need money, they need resources. So that's where climate finance comes in. Next. So in our project, we are focusing on how we're going to finance the renewable energy projects. There are multiple ways to do this. The big thing that always comes in government subsidies. In the US, we have the ITC, we call it investment tax credits, where business and residentials, they can put solar panels and renewable sources of energy generation in their house, and government gives them some percent of tax off. Similar kind of things exist in Germany as well. Then there's private investments. We have all heard about Tesla, their solar division, their cars, EV. Then Google have its own renewable energy commitment. These are some examples I want to put here. And then international fund is there. We have GCF, World Bank's ISMAP, which is Energy Security Management. I don't know the full from there, but it's something with energy security. It's ISMAP. And then green bonds are there. I've seen City of Johannesburg green bond, where they raise some money to build green infrastructure in their city, which is a great example. Apple issued some green bonds so that they can raise money for research and development in their organization. And there's always crowdfunding, like Indiegogo. There's Ecology, where people who have ideas regarding green infrastructure or sustainable related, they can come there and raise money or crowdsource money. Next slide. So now with this, what are the challenges of climate finance? Why is not everyone on this? Well, the big thing is that high initial investment cost. Let's say if I want to put out a solar panel in my house, at first it's going to cost me some money, maybe more than $10,000. And not everyone would have that kind of money. So there's a high initial investment cost with that. There's uncertain financial return. There's still to be ways to be figured out on how we're going to measure the financial return, because sometimes money are invested to uplift things which might not be very monetary, but more like human health or something, and how we're going to put a dollar figure on that. So there's that challenge. And then political and regulatory challenges are there. Next slide. So in conclusion, what you can do is A, support for renewable projects, B, educate ourselves and others about the importance of climate change, climate finance. Education really matters. And third, advocate for green policies. We need green policies to move forward. So advocate for that. Thank you.
Oh, I'm muted. All right, that concludes the slides from the ELCA program, but now I would like to invite our friends from the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy to come off mute, introduce themselves, and to lend their perspectives on this event. Sabia and Asma, it's over to you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say hello to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. My name is Asma Amri. I'm a recent alumnus of the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy, and I had the privilege of participating as a climate finance negotiator in COP27 and SB58 in Bonn with the UAE delegation. And I'm here today to share some of my experience as COP27 was actually my first COP to attend. And I hope some of the things that I'm saying or some of the elements I'm sharing today can be insightful to all of you. So to begin with, the experience in climate finance definitely had its ups and downs. And I consider climate finance to actually be the backbone of climate negotiations in a sense that it actually cross-cuts all sectors and tries to find linkages with different negotiation topics in order to improve the mobilization of these finances into the respected fields. And for example, I think Laura mentioned the Loss and Damage Fund, which was actually a very substantive outcome from COP27. And it's obviously a combination of loss and damage, cross-cutting finance as well. And to give context, for those who don't know, the parties obviously through consensus agreed to establish this fund for the most vulnerable countries to loss and damage, and the definition is yet to be clear to this day. So the fund is currently going through a series of transitional committee meetings in order to operationalize the fund and the funding arrangements. Back to my point of how finance cross-cuts different sectors, while it can be very beneficial to be, specialized or concentrating in climate finance, however, it can be very highly politicized and could deviate from the discussions further away from the scientific approaches. And therefore, in these discussions, the roles of diplomats, in my opinion, is very pivotal. Because unlike science, which base their efforts on evidence, right, and employ a trial and error approach, diplomats navigate those negotiations with a focus on finding diplomatic solutions that consider the national interests of their respective countries. And that was quite interesting for me to see in these negotiation sessions and these different approaches from different diplomats. And I've realized in these sessions that the efforts of these diplomats is to bridge the gap between different countries and to increase and foster the cooperation in order to accelerate the climate action. However, I've debated this topic with a lot of people who are in climate finance, were negotiators of climate finance, and they had another perspective saying, well, this could be viewed, or this is actually a diplomatic monopoly, because the deviation from science and the multitude of opposing viewpoints often lead to a prolonged procedure and delays the outcomes or delays taking action, decisiveness, decisions in climate action. However, it's yes, that's true, and that's what's been happening throughout the COPs for more than 28 years now. It's also really important to know that the multitude of the UNFCCC negotiations and how complex it can be, there are certain elements that every negotiator has to take into account before going into the negotiation rooms. And there are three important aspects to any issue. One, obviously, the scientific evidence. Two, the international law. Three, the national interest. And so to hold these three elements together is really important, and to understand how negotiators can leverage all three without hindering progress can be challenging, and therefore can, as I mentioned, elongate the process even further. And these negotiations, especially in finance negotiations, I would say, is very politicized, very, very complex, and necessitates careful considerations to these three elements that I've mentioned. And as for my experience, I would also like to add on what I've shared with you is the importance of including the private sector within the scope of climate action and negotiations, and how to track and monitor the private sector, specifically the non-party stakeholders, and align it with the transparency arrangement of the Paris Agreement. And I've realized there's a huge gap in transparency with non-party stakeholders that really can deteriorate or perhaps slow down the process for navigating these finances into actual climate resilient projects or just climate related projects in general. And also that brings me to my next point on what the UAE can do in COP28. And I'm not here as a representative of COP28. This is just based on my experience and my observations on what the UAE is doing and what I'm reading over the news. That the UAE hopes to accomplish an inclusive COP28, and that's you can view that in their website. And it definitely does include this inclusive approach on how to respond to the global stocktake and close the gaps to 2030. And from the thematic programs, you can see that this inclusive approach includes a variety of stakeholders from business, civil society, obviously youth. There will be a dedicated day for youth, dedicated day for health and indigenous people. There's going to also be a dedicated space for indigenous communities. And from His Excellency Majid Al-Suwaidi, he's the Director General of COP, has mentioned a few times that they hope to adopt an indigenous-led outcomes from COP28. And obviously COP28 is going to acknowledge the shortcomings of previous pledges and unpack a forward-looking approach to instill these sustainable agreements for years to come and to speed up an elongated process, specifically in the area of finance. And also in terms of climate finance for COP28, there's a huge focus and attention from the international community as well to deliver on the $100 billion target this year, as well as doubling adaptation finance by obviously a collective international cooperation. And also recently, the COP28 president revealed the importance of addressing the need to reform international financial institutions as well as multilateral development banks. Yes, and obviously one of the most important elements is how to operationalize the loss and damage fund and funding arrangements, and to develop the necessary mechanisms of all funding arrangements. And that was one of the most important aspects in finance for the upcoming COP. There's obviously a lot of other things to consider when speaking of climate finance that may come to COP28. I just wanted to briefly share the most important elements and items that that's magnified through COP. And I don't want to really dive into technical aspects of finance, and let's leave it to the negotiators in the negotiation rooms. However, the UAE is undoubtedly on the cusp of making significant strides in the international climate arena in general. And it's also a huge opportunity, it's a great opportunity for them to showcase some of their noteworthy climate action initiatives in the country. And that they have been implemented throughout the years. Since the establishment of the UAE in 1971, they've been on a roll of creating substantive initiatives that really impacted the environment in a positive manner. I hope I hope that the things that I said was really helpful in terms of climate finance negotiations. And I also hope to hope to share more of my experience with you later on. I look forward to the continuation of this dialogue, and I hope this was beneficial to you all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Asma. Tabia, did you have anything that you wanted to add on quickly before we dive into a Q&A portion?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to you wherever you are. My name is Tabia, and I'm also an alumnus from Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy. I was also among the students who were fortunate to go to COP27 and Bonn Climate Change Conference. And in my experience, I was specialized in adaptation. And Paulina, you gave an excellent presentation on adaptation that I think was very beneficial for me as well. And I just want to add a few things on what it was like in the negotiation rooms and the importance of GGA, which is the Global Goal on Adaptation. And most of the sessions I attended in COP27 and the Bonn Climate Conference were on the GGA. I attended formal and informal sessions. And in both sessions, it was very interesting for me to see how negotiating a framework that ensures the necessary support and resources for adaptation is actually a very complex task, because you're combining more than 200 countries in one room and asking them to agree on what will adaptation look like and what is the goal of adaptation. And in that conversation, it's very important to take into account the situations of countries, their vulnerabilities, their economies, on what they operate, on what like just the entire full picture of each country and how that becomes important in these conversations. So in 2015, with the Paris Agreement, they established the global goal on adaptation. And what makes it a little bit tricky is that, for example, if we look at mitigation, we can see the global goal very clearly, and it can be quantified. But when we look at adaptation and the global goal on adaptation, it's not something that we can quantify easily. Many of the measures are qualitative, and that makes the conversation a little bit more difficult, because what I might consider as adaptation, not the same as someone else. So it was very interesting to be in rooms where these things were discussed. And next week is going to be the last workshop, which is the 8th workshop on global goal and adaptation before COP28. And it's clear that there is a lot of progress that has been made in that regards. And we look forward more to the progress they're going to have, hopefully before COP28, to realize the global goal and have a substantive framework that works for everyone. If I may just add one last thing regarding the negotiation rooms. One thing that was very interesting for me, beside the complexity of the UNFCCC's process and how each body is feeding into the other, like different processes would be happening at the same time, and they will all inform one another. It was how many sessions were considered formal while others were informal. And while in the formal sessions, we would see the drafted agreements, we would see the stance of countries, the alignment of groups with one another. It was actually in the informal sessions that the countries would make a lot of progress, because they are sitting together, discussing, debating, and brainstorming together without the hat of their country. So no one is talking on behalf of a country or on behalf of a party, which makes the conversations flow easier. And no one is like watching out if someone would accidentally say something or would say something that is not in the interest of their country. No one's walking on eggshell, basically. Everyone is combining together to have these conversations and these debates. So that was a very interesting part for me. And I'll wrap up here because I think we're over the time. And thank you.
Thank you, Asma and Dabia, for your insights. Those were really wonderful. I'm going to pass the mic over now to our Climate Cardinal friends who are going to lead the Q&A portion. Just a reminder to you all in the audience, if you have any questions, you can either drop them in the chat, raise your hands, or let our facilitators for the Q&A portion know. I look forward to continuing this dialogue. Jackie and Mara, over to you.
Hi, I'm Jackie, and I'm the Director of Research at Climate Cardinals. And a first question that we have is posed to anyone, but basically, especially in the lead up to COP28, how do you think communication strategies or the priorities of what we should focus on, how do you think those strategies should evolve to most effectively convey the urgency and also get actionable responses from policymakers and communities alike?
Who wants to take a first stab at it?
I can
Go for it,
you know,
Laura.
I can go first. So something that from our perspective, I think from like the loss and damage group, we had a big, it's a big fund and it's a big process to like think that through and think through policy recommendations. And so when we met with our mentor that we got paired with, that was kind of, those were some of the questions that we asked as well. How do we make things, actionable for, those who are in the power, so we can make our recommendations actionable for those who can actually get the things done, right? And so one of the things that he said that I thought was, it was really simple, but it was actually really powerful. He was like, figure out who they are, figure out what they do, and make recommendations based on what they can do. And so, like I said, it's really simple. But I thought it was really powerful. And so I think that's something that we kind of need to keep in mind from, when you're either creating strategies or whether you're creating recommendations or whatever you're doing in your line of work. If you're not the one who has the power to do that, then you need to figure out who that person is, figure out what their title is, figure out what they do on a daily basis, and who's in their circle of influence, right? And then figure out recommendations or actionable steps that they can take in their day-to-day like work life, that's quote unquote easy for them. Like it's not like a huge leap for them to do, or there's not a ton of obstacles that they have to like overcome. So I think that's something really important to remember, and just kind of, make those actionable steps be something that they can actually do within their sphere of work life.
I can
Hopefully
add
that
on
helps.
that. I can add on that. My personal experience in climate negotiations with governments and leaders. One thing that always comes now is if you could personalize the story that you are trying to sell. It's like, rather than giving a global perspective, yes, climate change is globally affecting us, but if you could personalize the story to yourself or to your group of people, how that is affecting, I think that's a very compelling story. And then the leaders, for example, where I'm currently, when I was negotiating with my city leaders or in my university, then that's when I'm like, okay, this is how climate change has impacted us, and that's why we need policies to address this. And then putting a clear call to actions, like what you are advocating, you need to, what you are calling to action, you need to know that clear. And then highlight the mutual benefits. Don't highlight just your benefit. Highlight what they are also going to gain from this, because they are the one who is investing money in this. So what's the mutual benefits on this? There's things, and then youth engagement. There, youth are a great advocate. Tell your story. I would say this again: tell your story, personalize it, mutual benefits, collaborations. So those are some communication strategies.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If we want to move on to another question. So I think we've seen, based on the research you all have presented, that there's also a lot of these intersections of like science, finance, policy, activism are all incredibly important. So we're wondering, is there a way that you think that these different sectors can better collaborate together to ensure for more impactful results?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go
Please
ahead
go
if you want
ahead.
to take.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. My undergrad is in engineering, and then I also did a finance degree as well. So I have dual undergrad, finance engineering, and I work in the intersection of the science policy business oftentimes. And there's this conference called SPVF, they call it Science Policy Business Forum, where people, scientists, politicians, businessmen, they're all coming together to work on a solution. I think it's a key that we need to understand when we are advocating climate policies, is that sometimes as an engineer, I know that scientifically it makes sense, but from a business standpoint, we need to understand where is the money going to come from to fund that solution. And even if we find the money, do we have existing regulatory policies that may block it or may hinder the progress of that thing that we're trying to do? So it's critically important that these people, like SPVF, those kind of conferences, more happen so that people from all these places can come and sit down in one place and they can present that we all agree climate change is real and we all want to do something, but what is the bottleneck between when we move from scientific achievement to commercializations in business, what is the bottleneck there? Discuss that, figure that out, and from there, okay, what policies do we have? Can we have policies that can support this? Is there somewhere in the climate finance that we can find a way to fund this? Is there policies like that? So that's one thing I would recommend.
Yeah, so I think like in addition to that, like I personally like I do most of my work as a science person now, and I collaborate with a lot of people who look at things from a more policy lens. And I think it is interesting to see like what is prioritized in one community from another community. So like I just feel like talking about personal experience as a scientist, like it seems like it is important for us to speak to the other people in the other fields, like so that we figure out what works, what is important to them, and then we can try to present our work in a way that is relevant to them, and also like like hear what they have to say about what they think is important. Like, and I think like there's an aspect of this that I've seen in recent years where the adaptation community has come to the scientific community to tell them that look, the IPCC work that and the inter-comparison model work that we have now is great, but like we need more high resolution data that to allow us to do more actionable planning at the local level, because currently all these grid sizes are too big. And then so the scientific community is now taking that recommendation and trying to go forward with higher resolution like results so that it's more actionable for the adaptation community.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So hi, my name is Myra. I'm the Deputy Director of Technology at Climate Cardinals. Our next question is for the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy. So Debaya and Asma, but any one of our presenters are open to share their thoughts as well. So I know both of you were involved directly at COP27 as negotiators, diplomats, but we're wondering if you had any advice for how regular people can support diplomatic efforts to address climate change, even if they're not diplomats or negotiators themselves.
Thank you, Myra. Myra, for your question. Well, luckily for us, for me and Labia, were taking different classes and sessions prior to COP that really helped us understand what COP is and what are the different branches of the UNFCCC and how it operates. And for any regular person attending their first COP, it would be super interesting, but you would also get lost in different negotiation sessions, like, okay, what am I supposed to do? This is so unpredictable. It's you would find out there are certain unwritten rules that you wouldn't just normally read, and it's specifically with climate negotiations, it's very dynamic, and you have to get updated every now and then on what's going on the specific or special the field that you're concentrating on. So I would definitely recommend, I personally downloaded the UNFCCC application on my phone to get updated on different elements related to finance, and that really helped me. And there are a lot of different things, different decisions adopted, different proposals from different country groups that really helped me before getting into COP. And I just want to say it's quite normal going into the first COP because of how dynamic it is. It's just too complicated to understand the first time. But usually I was just discussing this recently with Labia, that we got the hang of it from COP27, and when we went to SB 58, we just understood the different intentions from party groups. We understood how corridor diplomacy actually worked, and we just naturally understood how these things operate. And obviously from learning diplomacy in the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy really helped us to approach different country groups. So my recommendation would be definitely to check out the UNFCCC application or the website to read on different submissions that really helped me personally. I don't know if Labia wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'd like to add as well to what Esma said, is that in COP, there are different zones. So there would be a zone that is for negotiations, and where most of the people there they would be considered party members. And there's also the other zone. I think it's blue and green. So the green would be open to the public, where there are many organizations, international organizations and local organizations, all coming together from all around the world to lead on the climate action. And although we would think that in COP, most of the conversation would be going from the highest level of countries talking together and agreeing, and it would go down. In fact, in COP, it's going both ways. You would find local communities, youth, and the civil society coming together and coming up with ideas and solutions, whether it's through workshops or whether it's through conferences where many party members would come and attend to find inspiration, to find what the local communities want, and so that could be incorporated in the dialogue that would happen in the negotiation rooms. So it's really not the work of only diplomats, but it's the work of youth, civil society, private sector, governmental entities, and everyone who has the will and that feels the urgency of the climate change action and could go and take part in any way possible. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you both. So I know to initiate real change involves, like you said, civil society, youth advocates, policymakers. So the question is for Laura. But again, we welcome any of the other presenters to share their thoughts as well. So Laura, could you discuss how maybe like a collaborative approach between academia, youth advocates, community and policymakers can lead to more effective solutions for addressing climate risks or loss and damage?
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to get off mute. Thank you. So I just want to make sure that I heard the question correctly. So you're asking about collaboration efforts, correct? That people can take at any point in time.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think this is a good one. So as much I think as everybody loves COP, like the COP events, COP 21 through 28, through all the ones that they're going to have, right? That is just a one event that everybody comes together. But the work happens throughout the entire year or decades so things need to happen, whatever outcomes come out of COP, out of these events, right? Then you need to actually go and do the work throughout the rest of the days. And I think that's where the collaboration comes in hand. And I think that's where events like this, or just getting together with different people that are outside of the realm of your usual space that you work in. So reaching out to people who, if you're not an engineer, maybe reach out to an engineer, and get their perspective on certain things that you're working on. And just really start that, because that's where this collaboration starts. Really, it starts really local. So I have this, or I guess it's not my saying. I used to work in disaster management, and a big part of it was a disaster starts local and ends local. It can go all the way up to international levels. It can go all the way up to governments and all these other private sectors, everybody coming together to create a solution for that problem. But at the end of the day, all the NGOs, all of the people are going to fade away, and the local community is going to be the one who's going to be doing that work day in and day out. And so that's kind of how I approach climate as well. We all have different communities that we live in, and so if you live in if you live in that community, you're going to want to make sure that you're doing what you need to do for that community. And then you can start reaching out and saying, hey, this is what works for our community. Maybe it'll work for your community as well. But you can't, it's like that concept of like, you can't know what works for you until you try it for yourself. And then you can reach across and be like, hey, let's figure out what that looks like. And especially working with islands, like what I do when I live on an island, I work with islands. When we think of solutions, we think of all the different things that we need to, we just need to think through those different ideas to figure out like who's going to need what and when and why. And that might come from mainland, that might come from the local area on the island, that might come from somewhere, a couple hours away. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to start that process. And you kind of just have to kind of be that person who's like not afraid of just reaching out to random people and saying, hey, I'm working on this thing. Do you want to do this with me? And the worst thing that they can say is no, and you'll just end up right where you are. But the best thing that they'll be able to say is yes, and here's 400 other people that are doing the same thing or something similar, and that can help you because these things connect to what you're doing as well.
Thank you so much. For our next question, I had a question in the chat from an attendee, and they asked how much the concept of circular impact is considered in financing or introducing green technologies. So I'm wondering if Rituraj maybe or anyone else would be able to hop on this question.
Would you repeat that question once again?
Yeah, so they asked how much the concept of circular impact is considered in financing or introducing green technology. So you have the hand raised. Do you want to unmute and share out loud?
Yeah, thank you so much. Wonderful presentations and insights. So my question, to be more specific, India right now is massively pushing this concept of electric vehicles, and which, if we see on an overall perspective, I was very happy. I was like, I need to get an electric vehicle right now because it solves the main evil of carbon, reducing carbon emissions. But then, if we see more, do we have the enough capacity to adopt such a sophisticated technology? Because we do not, with the power charging stations are still through coal. It's charged through coal, and the batteries are not recycled, so we have hectares of contaminated dump yards. So how much is this concept of circular impact of such technologies being discussed in international platforms? Because I'm sure this is the case with many other developing countries as well. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I will touch base on that. You bring up a very good question. Yeah, we have been talking that solar energy, or the innovation of the solar energy, has been with us for a very long time. A long time, I should say, if not very. But we still are yet to see a solar boom. It's like, why doesn't every house have solar panels? Or why doesn't every country has EVs? Kind of things. Why is it that way? Although we have the technology for a longer time, government has provided incentives. So it's something to think about. Why is it that? And at the same time, I'm going to introduce a term here called LCA, life cycle assessment. When you look at LCA of an electronic vehicle, about where the mineral comes from and how the recycling works, what does it look like? This is up to you. Maybe you want to Google and see what does it look like. So with the solar energy, or that energy, the big challenge is that energy storage. That's where the issue comes in, is that, okay, we're gonna get the energy from the sun, but how are we gonna store it? If you look at the EV vehicles energy stores, how are they storing it? We still don't have a concrete way, we haven't figured out a concrete way of storing energy. So energy storage is one of the expanding way. So when you talk about capacity, I think it's more a technological limitation of now rather than a capacity. Once we develop more capacity, sorry, once we develop more technology on that, about how we're going to store our solar energy, we're going to see more solar boom, our energy storage boom in that sector. That's how I see it.
Yeah, just to add to that, like there's another problem with with respect to renewable adoption, is the lack of infrastructure like grids and transmission lines. I think there's a study about the US, well, not particularly for India, but at least in the US, like if you wanted to move to everything renewable, like you need to expand the transmission line capacity by like 2 times, what we have currently in order to electrify everything. And so, yeah, there's also challenges on the infrastructure side.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I hope that answered your question. So I put the message in the chat, and finish off today, I'd love to hear what everyone's one wish for COP28 is. Each of our presenters want to go around and share their wishes. Would love to hear your responses.
I can take the first lead. One thing in this COP28, my wish is that to look at the NDC, National Determined Contributions, again, about the carbon emissions that each country do, and then the reporting that they do to the voluntary and involuntary bodies. So I think it's something we adopted with Paris Agreement in 2015, 2016, but I think we should relook at and then have all the countries report their carbon emissions and their goals about how they're going to limit their emissions so that we can meet either 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius goal.
Yeah, I'm happy to go. Oh, sorry, someone else.
I guess I can go. I think that for me, my hope, and this might be because I'm a huge dreamer, is that when big decisions are being made and people are having these dialogues, that it's not just thinking about big picture policies, but that we think about those who are not able to be at the table, and that we amplify the voices of those who were really actually doing these dialogues, for who are largely impacted by these changes. So making sure that the people who need it the most are able to be represented in some way.
Yeah, I'm happy to go next. I think at COP28, like I'm hoping to see that stronger language regarding phasing out fossil fuels and countries committing to timelines that are compatible with the 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius, the targets of Paris, because that seems to be wavering across, like in the past few weeks, you've seen even rich countries like the UK are still expanding fossil fuel projects. And and a related thing is that I want to see developed countries restate their commitment to help the rest of the world with mitigation efforts and adaptation, because the rich countries have been responsible for what we are seeing now today as present-day climate change. Yeah.
Does anyone have anything else to add?
If I could add on like what I hope to see in COP28 is obviously the fulfillment of old pledges of the 100 billion target, as well as operationalizing the loss and damage fund. I have high ambitions toward in finance, as well as doubling adaptation finance, and I hope we could, speed up the process on the loss and damage fund, because as I think Paulina mentioned, that there are some countries or there are some states that aren't able to be present in those negotiation rooms, specifically from the SIDS or the AOSIS party group. They're the most vulnerable, and they're at the front line of this climate crisis. And I hope to see, I hope to see, ambitious outcomes from this COP, as well as, sorry, perhaps having like an early harvest on the new collective and quantified goal, to have actual substantive outcomes from COP28, not just procedural ones. Yeah, that's what I want to add. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, speakers. Thank you all for putting so much thought and for sharing all of your perspectives. I've learned a lot. I hope our people in the audience have learned a lot and have been able to take something away from this. I know we are way over time, so thank you all again for your time and for being here. Super appreciative. I think it's so important that we are, as youth, are all able to come together and share our perspectives and come together. We are our strongest advocates. If you all want to stay connected, please let me know. This is what the whole initiative, this is what we as Globally are about, is connecting one another. So happy to continue these conversations again at a later time, but I wanted to thank you all again, speakers and audience, for being here today. All right. With that, goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.